Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was April 26th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. This document is in the secret seal register for Joan, and it's one that I think you can see Joan's presence in it. It's not just a bunch of boilerplate. There's some rhetorical flourishes and also a certain promise that is quite astonishing given the fact that we are very close to Joan having some very serious health problems. This letter is addressed to the prohomens, or I guess I should say the honorable men of the city of Athens. That's right, Athens, Greece. At this time, the Crown of Aragon had Athens as a territory that it called part of the Crown of Aragon. There were actually several places around the Mediterranean that the Catalan forces were holding, and this one is actually among the furthest to the east. But it's pretty prestigious. I mean, you've got at this time an awareness of the glorious classical legacy of Athens, and certainly also following the classical Greek civilization, the civilization of classical era Rome. So this particular holding carries with it some cultural prestige for Joan. And when we start getting into this letter, we're going to see a little bit about how this particular place is experiencing something that seems to be a pattern for this time period in Joan's reign, the very beginning of it. The pattern is this. There's a new king on the throne, and those who were thinking they might get some concessions or maybe break away, they see it as their chance. There's a little rebellion that's brewing in Sardinia. There's the Count of Empúries, who is possibly making some money off of hosting pirates in his ports. And then there's rogue elements in the province of Aragon and in Valencia. A lot of problems coming up that seem to be the result of people not really taking this new king as seriously as they took his father. The reason that we know that there's trouble in Athens for the Catalan government is that Joan is sending someone named Mossèn Felip Dalmau, the Viscount of Rocabertí, to rule over the Athens territory. The Rocabertí Viscounty is a very prestigious one. It's got a solid lineage going all the way back to the turn of the millennium. So I think the first Count of Rocabertí is something in like the 700s or 900s at the latest. And this person, this particular individual, Felip Dalmau, this current Viscount of Rocabertí, has been very loyal to Joan. This is an older fellow, probably around the same generation as Joan's father. But when that estrangement came up between Joan and his father, Père the Ceremonious, Felip Dalmau actually sided with Joan and then was kind of in exile. And so this is someone who has really shown his loyalty, has a lot of prestige when it comes to his nobility and his noble lineage. And he's also somebody, flashing forward, who comes back from Athens in time to lead the forces in 1389 against the invasion from Jean III, the Count of Armagnac. And we talked about that in an earlier episode, how Jean III, Count of Armagnac, is potentially planning trouble for the Crown of Aragon, even at this early date. All right. So in line 7, we see the name Mosen Felip Dalmau, Viscount de Rocabertí. Everything that comes before that is, I think, pretty much pleasantries, boilerplate, but then it starts to get interesting. So he says that, Joan says that he is dispatching Felip Dalmau, and then in the explanation of this, he says in line 11 that there have been some places that have, this is pretty funny, transportats de nostra obediencia y señoría. They've been transported from our obedience. And I think the word transport doesn't quite match up with what it sounds like as an English cognate, but it is an interesting, like, passive construction here that Joan is saying there's been some territories that have moved away from our obedience. And so the Viscount de Rocabertí is heading over there in order to transport them back. To transport the lands back to the rule of the Catalan authorities under the Crown of Aragon. So that's in line 11. And then he says something really interesting a couple lines down from that, basically starting at the end of line 14. Well, actually, middle of line 14. Nius pensets que tan assenalat, and then we go down to line 15. Membre com es aqueix de la nostra corona metam en oblit. Now, the OpenClaw AI large language model pipeline translated that into English as oblivion, that oblite. And I think that that's a little bit too dramatic. This sentence basically means, well, it's Joan telling the city leaders of Athens, don't think that we have sent such a noteworthy member of our court, of our crown, in order to send him into our forgetfulness. I mean, oblite. I mean, you could say oblivion, but that's just so dramatic. Basically saying, if you think that we are sending this guy because we don't care about him, you're exactly wrong. We are sending him because he is highly valued to Nostra Corona. And not only that, but then what comes, this just blew my mind. All right. It says that, avant lo item personalment visitar e alegrarnos e tots los altres qui pervit something like that. I'm not quite sure the paleography there. Nos hi havera de la nostra real presencia. That was Ghost growling. That's the people of Athens. They're like, oh my gosh, what? Because what Joan is saying, okay, nostra real presencia, personalmente visitar. Okay, there's a lot of English cognates in there. He is planning to visit Athens. He's making travel plans. What are we to make of this? What is going on? Because it's just 3 days from now that Violante is like rallying the monasteries of the country to pray for Joan in his illness, his long time illness. But here we are 3 days before that, and Joan is making travel plans to go to Athens in the future. It just, maybe Joan is just a very optimistic person and he's extremely sick, but he's like, you know what? I'm really sick. I'm on my deathbed maybe, but you know what? I think I'm going to pull through. And at the other end of this, I am taking a trip to Athens. Maybe that's his mindset. I mean, you know, it's possible. It's possible. Maybe also he's not that sick right now. Maybe we've got a real roller coaster in terms of his health. And all I can say is we just have to keep reading. At this point, I'm pretty confused. I don't know what circumstances would lead somebody to both be extremely ill and also planning a gigantic travel excursion in the same 5-day period, other than like some pretty dramatic optimism as a person. Yeah, I mean, but you know, it is totally possible that he just takes a dramatic decline, like in a day. Like this day, April 26th, he's on the up and up, feeling a new wind, and then, you know, it all comes crashing down in a matter of, you know, overnight or something like that. Maybe he's feeling a little feverish in this moment, though. Maybe he's a little bit delusional in like a delirium, and he's saying, I'm going to go to Athens. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go to the place of the ancient Greeks that I like to read about. I just don't know. But that's what we got in this letter, travel plans. And also, I think, an important note about the esteem that Joan has for the Count of Rocabertí. Violante also writes to the Count and Countess of Rocabertí with some interesting familiarity and personal details in later years, and Dawn Bratch-Prince has written a lot about that and includes some transcriptions of her letters to the Rocabertís in her articles, which I'll put citations to in the episode page for today. All right, I think that's what I got for today's letter. It's one that is perplexing. It's pretty straightforward. It does tie into this interesting Mediterranean expansion. So those of you that are really interested in political history and thinking about that from the lens of the Mediterranean, I think this is a really cool document for you, and kind of draws this political and kind of cultural connection in between Barcelona and Athens in the late 14th century. So there's that aspect to it that I think is pretty cool. All right, thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Because remember, the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.